At Arizona State University, we've made online education better, smarter, and more personalized so you can go further in your aspiring field.
I decided to pursue medicine once I realized that ASU did have the online program for biological sciences. You're still required to learn the same curriculum. You're still being tested on the same content that anyone would be tested on in person. The comprehensiveness of the program prepared me so well for medical school.
Explore over 300 programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
I'm Indy Nidell.
And I'm Burns.
And this is the Baseball History Time Machine,
where you can go every Sunday for the best in baseball history.
That you can. Now, the last two episodes have been about the 1870s and 1880s, so I'm going to jump forward in the time machine this week to the 1940s and the 1950s.
And what are we going to be talking about?
We are talking about the first African Americans, a few of them, to break the color line and play baseball in the National League or the American League.
And Jackie Robinson was the first.
That's true. He was the first to break the established color line. But he was not the first to play in the traditional major leagues.
Wait, no?
No, see, the color line wasn't a line until it was established. And it wasn't established until 1884 for the National League and the American Association, which was a major league back then. It took a few more years in the minor leagues.
Yeah, you sort of forget that that racial barrier wasn't just confined to the major leagues.
Well, it's easy to do so. The last white minor league to have an entire black team before it was banned from the league was the Connecticut State League, who had the Ansonia Cuban Giants playing with them in 1891. But they were expelled from the league after that. Although half their team defected that season to the Gorhams. I'm not going to go into that. But even in like 1887, when Frank Grant, who was black, was hitting .353 and leading the International League with 11 homers, there were only apparently 5 African Americans playing in all of the minor leagues. And guys like Grant, who is a Hall of Famer, took a lot of heat not only from opposing players who actively tried to hurt them, but often from their own teammates.
Yeah, that sucks if your own team doesn't back you.
Well, it does suck, and it didn't not suck even in the 1940s after Robinson and company were back in the white major leagues.
So you said that the color line was established in 1884. What about the black major leaguers before that?
Well, there may possibly have been others. There are 3 that I am aware of. William White, Fleet Walker, and his brother Welday. White played in exactly 1 National League game with Providence in 1879. Information about him is sketchy, but he was a Brown University student at the time, Brown is in Providence, and played first base for the college team, and then the 1 major league game when regular Gray's first sacker, Joe Start, was injured.
So just the 1 game?
Just the 1. Here's some interesting stuff. SABR, the Society for American Baseball Research, has done some digging and discovered that White may very well have been a former slave, and if so, was the only one who ever played in the major leagues.
Oh, wow.
The Grays game he played in was June 21st, 1879, after Brown had already won the college championship. And since the college club and the pro club shared the same ballpark and had played several early season practice games against each other, the Grays obviously knew White. They knew who he was. So it makes sense that they'd ask him. But they likely did not think that he was white.
I don't understand.
See, SABR's research, particularly by a guy named Peter Morris, found that William White was born in 1856 in Milner, Georgia, to A.J. White, who owned slaves back then, as before the Civil War. When A.J. died decades later, he left everything to his 3 children, one of which was William, whom he had with his servant Hannah, who was of mixed racial background.
So wait, so he was like a quarter black then?
Which still at the time very much got you labeled as just black in most states. Again, this was not long after the Civil War. But this is where the waters get murkier. William White listed his race on the 1880 census as white, and presumably generally lived his life as such. There's a photo of the 1879 Brown College team, and he is really light-skinned, so the question, for whatever value it actually has, that some ask is, should baseball recognize a 1-game substitute player who had only partial African-American ancestry, and who quite possibly played without anyone even knowing that, as the first black Major League Baseball player? But there is no such question about the other 2 African-American major leaguers I am aware of from the 19th century, the Walker brothers, Fleet and Welday.
Fleet.
Moses Fleetwood Walker. His major league debut was May 1st, 1884 with Toledo. Now, he played with Toledo in 1883, but they were in the Northwestern League that year, a minor league. They won the pennant, though, and their success propelled them to join the American Association. However, even before the 1883 Northwestern League season began, there were moves afoot to end Walker's career there before it began. In March, the league's executive committee met. This is a quote from the minutes, okay? Got it right here. A motion was made by a representative from Peoria that no colored player be allowed in the league. This created quite a discussion. It is well known that the catcher of the Toledo club is a colored man. Besides being a good player, he is intelligent and has many friends. The motion which would have expelled him was fought bitterly and finally laid on the table.
So Walker gets to play, but only barely. And he was a catcher, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what it says.
Yeah, he played the toughest of all 19th century positions. He was a catcher.
Yeah, they played without gloves, right? It's kind of hard to imagine like catching a fast ball with no gloves.
And, you know, the pitching distance was shorter then, too. So
it's going to sting.
And I can't say how fast people threw. I can't say if they were throwing 100 miles an hour, but if I was catching 75 barehanded, it's going to hurt, especially curveballs and stuff, too.
Especially on a cold day in March or in April. Yeah.
I read in a bio of Walker, actually, that he would occasionally wear lambskin gloves, but mostly caught barehanded. He did wear a mask, apparently.
I mean, he's an intelligent fellow. That sounds like a smart thing to do.
Yes. In Toledo's 84 games in 1883, he appeared in 60 of them, which is an enormous percentage for a catcher in the 1880s, since they often got injured. He also played in exhibition games both before and after the season.
So how did he do?
During the season, he hit .251, which was decent for both the team and the league, but he was a real star on defense. So they moved to the fast company of the association for 1884, and the season began May the 1st with a 3-game away series in Louisville. That first game was obviously a milestone in Major League history, but it was rough for Fleet Walker. Okay, 3 years earlier, when he played with a semi-pro team, Fleet Walker had been in Louisville with them, and he wasn't even allowed to take the field. So he at least got to do that this time. But yeah, nasty is a mild way of describing the crowd, and it didn't help that Toledo was swept in the 3 games. In fact, they lost their first 8 games.
Oof, that's a tough start to the season.
Funny enough, though, while they were 20-35 for the first half of the season, which is a .365 winning percentage, they were 3 games over .500 the second half, going 26-23 to finish overall 46-58, and in 8th place in the 13-team league.
Oh, 13 teams.
The Washington team didn't survive past the beginning of August and was replaced by Richmond to finish out the season.
Okay, so how did things go for Fleet Walker?
Well, he took abuse from the press, the fans, the local townspeople away from the field, a bunch of players who did not want to take the field against him, a bunch of players who did not want to take the field with him. He also suffered from one enormous handicap, working with Toledo ace Tony Mullane, the Apollo of the box.
The Apollo of the box?
That's what the ladies called him, and I'll get right back to him just after this.
Are you looking for a new job or want a career change? Look no further than Monster.com. Need a little help standing out? Our expert resume writing services will make sure you shine. Want to brush up on your interview skills? Engage with our AI interview prep tool. Want some advice on negotiating your new salary? Visit our salary tools and extensive library of career advice articles, and you'll have all the tips and tricks you'll need to succeed. Visit Monster.com today and take the first step towards your career. Monster.com. Find your right job fit.
Back to Tony Mullane, who was quite popular with the female fans, or cranks.
Why do they call them cranks?
Well, it wasn't just the female fans. People who loved baseball were called cranks in the 1870s, and that began to be replaced with fanatics or just fans. That's where the expression comes from. Any sports fan. So here in 1884, it's mostly fans, but still a few cranks.
The things you learn here.
The things you learn. Okay, imagine being the catcher and the star pitcher did not want to work with you, because that's how it was. Mullane would say later in life that Walker was the best catcher he ever worked with, but he disliked working with him to the point that he just pitched whatever he wanted without looking at Walker's signals. Remember, these are barehanded catching, too.
Wow,
And,
that's...
yeah, and one day Walker signaled for a curve, and Mullane threw a fastball. And Mullane was fast.
Yeah, that's a bit of a dirty trick, especially if Walker didn't have like much padding and stuff.
No padding.
They didn't have the kit that they have today at all.
No. And they agreed that after that incident, he didn't actually get hurt from that, but they agreed after that when the two played together, Mullane would pitch without any signals, and Walker would just have to accept whatever came his way.
Wow, even from just a normal catcher-pitcher relationship, I don't even like this guy to begin with. Mullane sounds like a bit of a terrible person.
He was a prickly character, I'll say that. And he kind of screwed himself out of the Hall of Fame.
Oh, imagine. How so?
No, I'll explain.
Okay.
Sidetrack accepted.
Yes.
He pitched for the Browns in 1883, the St. Louis Browns, and though he was reserved for 1884, he jumped first in the offseason to the St. Louis Maroons of the Union Association, and then Toledo, who played in the same league as the Browns. So he got a reputation as a contract breaker, and after the 1884 season, signed with the Reds and got a big cash advance, even though he'd made an agreement with the Browns. So he was suspended from baseball for a year. Now, Tony Mullane won 284 games in his career, and every single 19th century player who topped 300 made the Hall of Fame. Mullane won 30-plus games each year, 1882 to 1884, and then again in 1885 and 86. So he very likely would have won the mere 16 games needed to reach 300 had he pitched in 1885, and one would imagine a place in the Hall of Fame.
I'm finding it hard to feel much sympathy for him, the way he treated his own catcher, never mind the fact that the man was a person of color. So
Mullane's attitude, though, it was fairly common back then. Chicago's Cap Anson, who we saw in the last two episodes, was a pretty outspoken racist, and there are claims that it was he who really began the drive to get black people out of major and minor league baseball.
Oh, how so?
In 1883, Chicago played an exhibition during the season against Toledo, and Anson very loudly refused to allow his team to play against Walker. Thing is, Walker had a sore hand and wasn't even scheduled to play. But Toledo manager Charlie Morton kind of called Anson's bluff. Not playing would have meant forfeiting all the gate receipts. So the game was played, and Walker played anyhow, sore hand or no. They asked him if he wanted to, and he said, yeah. I should point out that the Toledo top brass, and the city in general, were very much on Walker's side.
Yeah, good. Go Toledo.
But this really brought the issue to the forefront of things and kick-started the campaign to bar African Americans from the leagues.
Okay, I have to get back to something. Charlie Morton was managing Toledo. Same name as current Orioles pitcher Charlie Morton, who I remember you were very fond of when he was an Astro.
I loved him when he was an Astro. Me and my Astros buddies, we don't call him Charlie Morton, though. He's always Charlie Murphy.
Like Eddie Murphy's brother who used to make those videos.
Yeah, and that's how Rick James said his name in the video. Charlie Murphy, right? We also call Charlie Morton CFM, and you can guess what the F stood for? And no, it was not negative. It was always positive.
So another Charlie Morton was managing Toledo.
Yeah, they come in six-packs. And this that's actually from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Somebody might have recognized that out there. That's good. And this Charlie Morton got a letter in September from the Richmond, Virginia team, Virginia being in the South, saying that if, when Toledo plays Richmond, if they put in Walker, there are 75 men ready to attack him. The letter says Richmond is writing this, quote, to prevent much bloodshed, and that only Morton can prevent it.
So what happened? Did they attack him?
Okay, it was actually a moot point, because by the time the Toledo away games were played at Richmond, which were the last two games of the season, Walker had already been released.
Oh, how come he was released?
Injuries. He hit .263, which was second best on the team after the big star, Sam Barkley, but already after July 12th, he was only physically able to play in 6 more games and was released in September. He never played again in the major leagues.
I imagine we're supposed to talk about other players now, but can you tell me what he did do after 1884? That's Walker, by the way.
This episode was not supposed to be about the 1880s again. I was trying to get away from there, but yeah, sure, okay. In 1885, he played with Cleveland in the Western League for a while, but the whole league folded. And then he played with a team in Waterbury, Connecticut. He played a full season with them in the Eastern League in 1886, then played with Newark of the International League in 1887. George Stovey, who was also black, was the Newark star pitcher. So they were an all-black battery in a white league. And they were pretty good together. In July that year, though, Anson kept his promise to not share the field with black players when Chicago came to town for an exhibition, and at his request, Stovey and Walker were not allowed to play. That same day, the International League decided they would not issue contracts to any more black players. Walker continued to play, though, since he already had a contract, and ended his career in the International League playing with Syracuse in 1888 and 1889. The next African-American to play in the International League would be Jackie Robinson with Montreal in 1946.
So we're getting to the 1940s now, at least.
No. I have more guys to mention first, starting with Moses Fleetwood Walker's brother, Welde Wilberforce Walker.
Welde Wilberforce Walker. These names are fabulous.
Yeah. Welde, sometimes called Weldy, was 4 years younger than Fleet, and he was a utility player. Now, he played at Oberlin and the University of Michigan before joining Fleet in Toledo for 5 games in 1884. The reason for that was a series of injuries to the regular Toledo players. Those 5 games were in late July and early August. Weldy apparently also blamed Anson for not being allowed to play Major League Ball after 1884, and even David Fleitz, who was Cap Anson's biographer, agreed with that.
Did Weldy continue playing minor league ball at all?
That he did, and also in 1887 he played with Pittsburgh of the National Colored Baseball League, which disbanded a few weeks after the season began.
Was that the first kind of attempt at an African-American league?
It was the second, a year after the Southern League of Colored Baseballists,
Love that.
played for a couple months in 1886.
I like the word baseballists. This is a while before the Negro Leagues got going, right?
Yeah, this is a few decades.
That's pretty impressive, especially doing it in the South way back then.
I do want to leave the 1800s now, but I'm still not going to the 1940s yet.
No?
No, I was going to, but I've realized that I have more stops on the way and more guys to cover, including a guy who is not even African American, as it happens.
But he's still a part of this story.
Yeah, he sure is. He's a Cuban named Armando Marsans.
Armando Marsans? I've never heard of him.
And yet, he was not only a star in the major leagues, he was part of a landmark baseball court case. Neither of those, though, is why he's relevant today. But I'll talk about those before I mention why he is. First of all, Armando Marsans was a star, as I said, even though, like many long-ago stars, he is forgotten today. He was the first Cuban star in Major League Baseball in the 20th century, and one of the first 2 Cubans in the major leagues since the 1870s. Like many other players, he played winter ball in Cuba in the off-seasons, and was one of the first players inducted into the Cuban Baseball Hall of Fame in 1939.
So who did he play for in the States then?
I'll get to that in just a minute after this. Armando Marsans came up with Cincinnati, and he and that other Cuban, Rafael Almeida, debuted July 4th, 1911. Bizarre side note, this was in the middle of such a heat wave that the Cincinnati Enquirer would report the next day that 27 people died.
Yeah, before air conditioning.
Very much before air conditioning. Well, Almeida never set the league on fire, but Marsans became a hot young property. In 1912, he hit .317 with 35 stolen bases, both in the league top 10, and in 1913 hit .297 with 38 steals. This was the middle of the dead ball era, so averages like that, they were eye-opening. Hey, here's another side note. Clark Griffith was his first manager, but he left to take over the Washington Senators. He was so impressed with Marsans and the Cuban talent pool that of the 63 Cubans who began playing Major League Ball while Griffith was active, 35 of them did so for the Senators.
Oh, wow. That's dedication to the Cubans. That's more than half of the...
It sure is. Marsans' career, however, was derailed by the courts.
What happened?
1914 rolled around, and Buck Herzog was his new manager. He and Buck really did not get along that well. Before I continue, though, I should say there's a pretty good bio book of Marsans out there called simply Armando Marsans by a guy named Peter Toot. Yep. It's got a lot of good detail about his major and minor league career and some good local color, and it's worth a read. Anyhow, already in spring training, Herzog accuses Marsans of faking an injury and suspends him. Marsans demands a trade, but the Reds won't do that. Herzog keeps riding Marsans when the season gets going, and soon enough, Armando Marsans jumps the team after playing just 36 games.
But where could he go to play instead?
1914 and 1915 were the 2 seasons in the 20th century that there were 3 major leagues. The Federal League was in business.
We have to do an episode on the Federal League. I always forget about that.
Everyone forgets about them, and so we absolutely will. Marsans gets snapped up by the St. Louis Terriers of the Federal League, a 3-year, $21,000 contract, which is more than $2,000 a year more than he was getting with Cincinnati. Here's the thing, though. Teams would give players 10 days notice when they released them, when they wanted to let them go. So Marsans does the same thing with the Reds. He gives them 10 days notice.
That's pretty ballsy. I got to
Well,
give him that.
he should have guessed what would happen. Cincinnati filed a lawsuit in federal court, and it had to be federal because, remember, Marsans was not a U.S. citizen, claiming that their property, their words, not mine, was jeopardized. And they got an injunction that Marsans could not play for St. Louis until the case was settled. And since he wouldn't play for Cincinnati, he went home to Cuba to wait out the case.
So I'm assuming it took a long time?
In baseball terms, it did. The 1914 season ended with no verdict. And when the Cuban winter ball began, Marsans was going to play there. But here's a new wrinkle. The National Commission said they'd ban any major league player who played against Marsans. So he played that winter under an assumed name, Mendromedo.
Mendromedo?
Mendromedo. And if you Google it, which I did, you get exactly 2 hits, both about Marsans. So the winter flies by, and 1915 begins. And finally, on August 19th, a federal judge stops the injunction and says that Marsans can play in St. Louis. But the time away from the major leagues had affected Marsans' play.
And not in a good way, I
No.
assume.
He hits just 177 in 36 games in 1915. In 45 games in 1914, he hit 311 with 17 steals. So after 1915, the Federal League folded and he was assigned to the Browns in the American League, but he was no longer the same player. He hit 254. And though he did steal 46 bases, he was caught stealing 26 times.
Oof.
He then went to the Yankees, hit even worse, broke his leg, and a few dozen games in 1918 was the end of his major league career.
Wow. So did he continue to play in Cuba? Did he go back?
He did, and now I'm going to get to why I'm even mentioning him here today at all. Now, there were Cuban players that were of African ancestry, and there were those of European ancestry. Marsans was the latter, which is why he could play in the white major leagues, whereas guys like Hall of Famer Martin Dihigo were the former, and they could not.
Right.
Here's the side note I took all this time to get to. Dihigo played in 1923 with the Cuban Stars East in the Eastern Colored League, which was one of the Negro Leagues. According to both Peter Toot and James Riley in the Biographical Encyclopedia of the Negro Baseball Leagues, Marsans played a few games with those Cuban Stars East late in the 1923 season. That means that Armando Marsans was the first guy to play in both the major leagues and the Negro Leagues.
Oh, wow. I did not see that coming. That's really, really cool.
Okay, it's more interesting than groundbreaking.
Yeah.
I mean, Marsans was not African American. Well, he wasn't any kind of American, but he was not black. And he did it in the reverse order from later guys like Jackie Robinson, who genuinely were groundbreaking. And it was only a few games, and no one at the time thought anything of it.
It's a good sidetrack, though.
There is one thing. I had to say that like Columbo, I'm sorry.
Of course.
There is one thing. While I have the writing of Riley and Toot saying this, I cannot find any actual statistics to back it up. Not at baseballreference.com, nor at the Seamheads Negro League database. If anyone out there does have any box scores or stats from some source I managed to miss about those few games in 1923, please let us know. You can get hold of us either at our Facebook page, or you can email us at baseballhistorytimemachine, all one word, at gmail.com.
And while you're at it, you can send us any suggestions for episodes. We have a list of about 46 ideas so
It's over
far.
50 now.
Oh, it's over, okay, so it's over 50. Okay. But but it's in no particular order, but it would be nice to have a whole bunch more. So if you have any ideas, fire them to us. Yeah.
I love looking through the list of ideas. Okay, but beyond ideas, now back to baseball.
Back to baseball.
We have a couple more guys to cover before Robinson.
Like who?
Like Jimmy Claxton. He was born in Canada to American parents, and he had a big mix of ancestry, which included both Native American and African American. He was the first black man to play in the minor leagues in the 20th century.
Aha, so how did he manage to do that?
He managed that because, contrary to African Americans, Native Americans could play both major and minor league ball. And in 1916, he was introduced to the Oakland Oaks of the Pacific Coast League as Native American. He soon pitched a few innings in each end of a doubleheader, but when it was revealed he also had African blood, he was promptly fired. There was, however, a baseball card made of him, and, well, as far as I'm aware, he is the first African American to have one of those, which is a milestone. Right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, let's see. I think I need to also mention Charlie Grant.
Charlie Grant?
Charlie Grant was a ball player around the turn of the century, and though he was black, He was pretty light-skinned, and he had pretty straight hair. So in 1901, John McGraw, who was managing Baltimore in the American League in its first year as a major league. Baltimore had a franchise in 1901, 1902. McGraw tried to sneak him onto the team as a Cherokee named Charlie Tokohama.
I guess it didn't work.
It did not. Grant had just spent a couple years playing in Chicago with the Columbia Giants. So when the Baltimore team went to Chicago, which is still before the season starts, Grant was easily recognized and the jig was up. So he never managed to play a game in the major leagues.
Well, he must have been pretty good for McGraw to even try a stunt like that, right?
I imagine so. McGraw, for all of his character flaws, was pretty forward-thinking about just wanting the best players to make the best team, whatever they looked like.
Makes sense, yeah. And when did he die?
1934.
So quite a ways before Jackie Robinson then.
A long ways before Jackie Robinson died, but before Jackie Robinson broke into baseball.
Yeah, exactly.
I knew what you meant. I was just being a jerk.
Yeah, no stress.
But in the 1930s, there were all kinds of exhibition games between black and white teams or all-star squads, and some black players were invited to tryouts with major league teams, but it never became anything.
So now we're going to talk about Robinson, Larry Doby, and the first guys who finally broke the color line in the 1940s, right?
We're not, actually. I've rambled for so long about all this prelude that I'm going to have to leave that for next week, and this is just going to have to be part one.
You keep doing this.
I do keep doing that, but I don't realize how much there is to talk about any particular subject until I start writing about it and we start talking about it, and
Yeah, I mean, it's fun. We get to ramble and we get to babbling. So
It is very much the highlight of my week, and for everyone out there, we hope it is the highlight of your week as well. So do not hesitate to get hold of us on Facebook and let us know. Actually, we put these audio episodes out on YouTube as well, and the channel there is just the Baseball History Time Machine without my name. So you can also leave us comments there. And you can get these episodes ad-free if you join us at patreon.com, and you usually get them a couple days early because I put them up there ad-free as soon as I've finished editing the sound.
Yeah, leaving us comments is actually a great idea. We're looking forward to hear from you. But that means we're done, right?
We are done, so why don't you take us home?
I'm Burns.
And I'm Indy Nidell.
And we'll be back next week with the Baseball History Time Machine.
Shopify's point of sale system helps you sell at every stage of your business. Need a fast and secure way to take payments in person? We've got you covered. How about card readers you can rely on anywhere you sell?
Thanks. Have a good one.
Yep, that too. Want one place to manage all your online and in-person sales? That's kind of our thing. Wherever you sell, businesses that grow with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 a month trial at shopify.com/listen. Shopify.com/listen.